Hi, all. My name is Mike Bennett. I'm a campus minister here, working in the student neighborhood and with retreat ministry. And recognizing that today we are 2 weeks into Lent, it strikes me as a good potential checkpoint to think about how are we growing closer to Jesus, closer to God in this Lenten season. Um, I know that sometimes when we think about Lent, it might be easy to think about um, what sort of penances we are engaging in, or things that we're giving up, and those can be fruitful for helping us kind of take a step back to be intentional about how we're living our life, so that we can recognize God's presence. And I think ultimately that should be the goal. How are we growing in deeper relationship with Jesus, with God? Um, and so I think 2 weeks in might be a good checkpoint to just think about that. What are the things in your life that you've encountered in these last 2 weeks? How have you encountered Christ? And in what ways might your Lenten practice be driving you in that direction? How is it? How is it helping you to be attentive to Jesus' presence in your life? And so, as I think about that, it reminds me a little bit about my experience. So, when I graduated from undergrad studies at UD, I started a year of service at Nazareth Farm in West Virginia. It's a Catholic nonprofit that does home repair for the surrounding area, and brings in high school, college, and young adult volunteers for a week-long service immersion. So for many years, we've had a breakout trip that goes there at UD. That's actually how I got connected to the farm initially in my undergrad years. And you also live in community with the other staff members. And so I started as a year of service. It ended up being, I extended my time, and it was almost 2 full years of volunteer service between undergrad and grad school. And one of the practices that the staff there does is, whether there's volunteers there for their week-long immersion or it's just the staff, Thursdays, the communal prayer time together always is an opportunity to recognize and share out loud where you have seen God in the previous week. And so, one thing that I keep here in my office is my shared prayer cross. And so, this is similar to the cross that we would pass around to the group for that shared prayer experience. And so, everyone has a chance to hold it, and you can always pass. But for me, this was a challenging exercise some weeks, and other weeks, the moments were a lot clearer. And so in those challenging weeks, there were definitely moments where I was walking into prayer thinking, oh man, what am I going to share this week? Because I just hadn't done that reflection yet. And I noticed that as I engaged in this prayer opportunity, even to do it on a weekly basis, helped me be more cognizant of where Jesus was present to me in my life. I would say, additionally, the exercise of this prayer helped me go deeper in how I recognize Christ, and that could also fluctuate at points. So there might be weeks where it felt really challenging, and maybe it's worth recognizing Christ in that challenge. There might be other weeks where, it could be something simple like the blessing of sunshine or warm weather, or maybe there was a way that something in nature struck me that maybe could feel a little bit like happenstance, but could also be in other ways recognized as God's little bit of a nudge, or God's grace impacting me. Other weeks, I think it could be something much more significant, like moments where I felt the Spirit work through me and how I might have been walking with or supporting someone, or when I hear God saying something to me fairly clearly. And so I share that exercise and a little bit of my experience, maybe to encourage all of us to take a moment today and reflect on that experience, to reflect on where has Christ been present with you recently. It could be the last day, it could be the last week, um, whatever time frame you want to put on it. And so I would really encourage you to maybe think about integrating that prayer experience in your life somehow. And maybe there's a way to share that prayer experience with others that you're close to. And I suggest that also because I think one way that prayer method is helpful for me is that it also helps me recognize Jesus in my everyday experiences and to acknowledge that Jesus is walking with me um, and accompanying me in my life. So when I was at the farm, one thing that I made for my now wife, my girlfriend at the time, was a clock. So I cut out a piece of wood from a log and engraved it with a quote that says, God, there's nothing that can happen today that you and I can't handle together. And I liked that on a clock because I think it was a daily reminder or the frequent reminder when you're looking at the clock, to remember that God is with us in everything that we do. And so I think that for me demonstrates how we walk together with God in our lives, and also calls me to recognize those Christ-filled moments. So I invite you all to do that. If it's helpful, maybe this is an experience that you have already integrated in your prayer life. But another way of integrating this might be through what's called the examen that comes out of Jesuit tradition with St. Ignatius. And it's can be a pretty simple practice that if you do it, it's encouraged to kind of do it at the end of every day. But if you engage in it, it's a way of acknowledging God's presence with you throughout that day as you reflect back, but also thinking about how do you carry that forward. And so there's 5 steps to the examen. And you can search this. I just Googled, a simple examen, and it came up on ignatianspirituality.com. But the first step is to become aware of God's presence. So just spend some time centering yourself and acknowledge the ways that God is in the room with you, and take those moments to center yourself on that presence. The second is to just look back at your day and notice those spots where you might have gratitude. And so for me, that's really the point where I express gratitude, and it's because of Christ's presence with me throughout the day. And it's really helpful to look back and acknowledge, maybe I didn't see it in the moment, but I can see it in hindsight. As you do that, the third step is to pay attention to your emotions. So as you reflect back on those moments where you're grateful, where you acknowledge God's presence, what sort of feelings come up for you? They could be challenging emotions, they could be affirming emotions, whatever they are, just acknowledge them and maybe even sit with those for a little bit. What do those emotions say to you about that experience, about how you responded to God's presence, how you may have embraced that gratitude or may have overlooked it? And then maybe there's something from your day, this is the 4th step, that you really pray about, that you really sit with for just a little bit. This isn't meant to be a long form of prayer, but it can be sometimes if you really have the time and the focus, as well as something that strikes you. And then the last step is to look forward to the next day. And so often for me, this is where I think about, all right, so here's how I recognized Christ today, here's what I'm grateful for, and here's what I may have learned from reflecting on that. And so what do I do with that tomorrow? And there was a point for me that the examen and this experience of shared prayer and examining where Christ was present for me recently became a journaling exercise. I would do it before bed, and then in the morning, maybe I'm in the shower, maybe I'm getting breakfast ready, I'd be able to think back, what was that thing I wanted to carry forward to today? And it helped kind of give some focus for me to move on into that next day and to continue to walk with God more fully. And so maybe those are a few helpful things as I encourage you to kind of engage in a checkpoint. How is your Lent going? How is your Lenten experience this year? helping you grow closer to Christ, to God? And how might you recognize Christ's presence in your everyday? Thanks, everyone.